I'm Tobin Arthur of angelMD. I want to welcome you to the Spotlight. Today we're joined by Mike Moradi of Sensulin. But before we begin, I want to start out, as I usually do, with a quote. Today's quote comes from the famous author and businessman Arnold Glasow. And the quote is that progress is what happens when impossibility yields to necessity. And it's a quote I thought particularly apropos given what we're talking about today and the challenge that Sensulin is looking to address. But first off, Mike, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So let's start off, Mike. Just give the viewers a sense of your background. How did you get from there to here?
Sure. I'd be happy to. I'm a biochemist by training and was one of those students that decided I was going to be a dentist. So I ended up doing very well on the test, got into dental school at Temple University of all places, and at the last minute decided not to go in order to start companies for a living. Now, in hindsight, the first company failed just miserably. So after a year, I had to shut that down. But the next one thankfully did reasonably well. We made a nanoparticle titanium dioxide for sunscreens, automotive coatings, which was acquired by DuPont. So it was sort of my my redemption deal. But fast forward several years, I had on both sides of my family a strong history with with diabetes, basically. And on my dad's side of the family, all four brothers and sisters were diagnosed with type 2 between the ages of 40 and 60. One of them has the more severe insulin-dependent form of type 2. And on my mother's side of the family, there are 12 brothers and sisters. 8 out of the 12 have type 2. So for me, I didn't have to look very hard at the writing on the wall to see that, as a 5'10" person weighing 212 pounds at the time, if I didn't make some pretty drastic lifestyle changes, I would end up just like everyone else. So I've since lost 45 pounds talking to you from a treadmill desk, and that's really what keeps me going.
How long have you had the desk, by the way?
Since January of this year, and I've already had to buy new pants.
Nice. Well, cool. So tell us, leading up to that leads right into Sensulin. Tell us a little bit about the mission that Sensulin has and how it came to be.
Sure. So after the lifestyle change, I was looking for opportunities in the diabetes space that could leverage my background in biochemistry and advanced materials. And after one company that preceded this in the ophthalmology space, I bumped into Dr. Anand Pragada, who is our co-founder and chief scientist. And one thing led to another. My fascination became a part-time role, which became a full-time role, which at this point is more like 3 full-time roles. So he is a researcher at Texas Children's Hospital and Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, postdoctoral fellow from MIT that worked for 6 years at Abbott, and the following 6 at a company called Sequus. Sequus is famous for inventing what's called the stealth liposome platform that is in Doxil and a couple of other FDA-approved drugs. And he, after spending some time in the Bay Area there at Sequus, he and his wife never saw each other and decided that if they didn't leave and start a family, they would never have kids. So he took a job at the Cleveland Clinic, which is where he and one bright graduate student came up with the idea that is now Sensulin. And of course, our goal is to create a glucose-responsive insulin for type 1 and type 2 diabetes. If we succeed, it would vastly reduce the number of needles required for type 1 patient every day from perhaps 4 to 6 to as few as 1, we hope. And it certainly would reduce the number of required lancets to get a drop of blood for your glucometer. So very, very dramatic if we can make that work. And we've put together a great team thus far to help build that out.
So speaking of the team, why don't you just give us a little bit of background of the team?
Sure. So beyond Dr. Anna Pragada, the Scientific Advisory Board has 3 past presidents or CEOs of the American Diabetes Association and the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. We have the gentleman that ran Merck's diabetes franchise. We have the founder and CEO of the premier human clinical studies group for diabetes studies. And a handful of others include, I guess, the chief scientist from MiniMed, which commercialized the first insulin pump and then was acquired by Medtronic. As far as the internal team, our chairman is the CEO of Amylin, which was the largest diabetes exit in history when Bristol Myers acquired them for $7 billion in 2012. Along with him, we have also his former chief medical officer, and his head of drug delivery is now our chief technology officer. Chris Rhodes is the single most important person in helping turn the science into a commercial product, and he was the vice president of research at the company that invented what is now mankind's Afrezza inhalable insulin. And of course, having spent several years at Amylin as head of drug delivery, worked with several different diabetes compounds as well. So I think we have a great team to get from 0 to 1, so to speak.
Nice. So what is the challenge at this point? What's the next step in the development of the company?
So we have at least underlying rodent proof of concept for the technology. And for us, the challenge is now to take that and identify a candidate formulation for a human clinical study, which it is our goal to get there by the end of 2015. So with that, of course, you also have another 6 to 9 months preparation for the human clinical study. And as I mentioned, our clinical partner, the Perfield Institute, is likely to begin those studies perhaps in the beginning of 2017. So a lot of the challenges today relate mostly to formulation, and basically that's a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error, trying to hone in on a clinical candidate formulation that has the right profile, so to speak. So that basically is being handled by Chris, our CTO, and 4 scientists that are in our labs there in San Diego, California.
So it kind of reminds me of an interesting setup that you guys have, but I don't think it's altogether that different than a lot of early stage biotech companies. You're not physically in San Diego, although you're there once in a while, as well as, so you've got basically Texas, Oklahoma, San Diego. Tell us how you guys work the combination of the team and geography and so forth.
Well, as we're chatting here on Skype, I should mention that it's an integral part of the modern biotech. We have people all over the place. We also have a network of contract research organizations and soon a contract manufacturer that won't all be in the same location. And so I guess for me, I have a Bay Area number from 2 companies ago, and it's a bit of a challenge to coordinate. But frankly, most of the hard work is being done by the scientists in the laboratory environment, and they're certainly in good hands with Chris Rhodes at the helm. So if you had to put a number on it, I guess we have maybe 6 people internally, another 2 or 3 full-time equivalents in Houston, and then maybe 2 or 3 more across the different contract entities. And I suppose it's a good way to keep overhead down. At the same time, it presents a few communication challenges that we've been able to solve with regular phone calls every Monday morning, and then, of course, a lot of travel on my part.
Fair enough. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you've faced. I think things that would be insightful for other entrepreneurs, maybe one of them being the communications, travel, et cetera, but any other challenges that come to mind, not only necessarily with Sensulin, but maybe even prior experiences and how you've addressed those?
Sure. So I think a lot of the companies that I've been involved with, every single one of them felt more or less the same way until the exact moment that the company was either acquired or the moment that we decided it wasn't working, we had to shut it down. And across those 9 companies, I suppose 1/3 of those have worked, 1/3 have failed, and the middle third, I hope, will become worth something someday. There's a different set of challenges at each step along the way. But I think the common thread across all of these organizations has been trying to find the right team with the right set of experiences. And even if it doesn't necessarily get you to the point you thought you would get to on day one, the best teams will often find solutions for very big problems. So I always make it a point to try and recruit people way out of my league. And each time I do this, I get a little bit better at it. But thankfully, in this company, it was almost a dream team, I suppose. It is a dream team of diabetes professionals that really started with one seed, and that was having the right chief technology officer. And alongside that, of course, we started writing grants, and then we were able to recruit one key scientific advisory board member. And from there, it was almost a chain of relationships, because everyone tends to know each other in spite of the fact that we're very fragmented in this industry. And we got to where we are today just through sheer determination and not giving up. So hopefully that at least gives you a bit of insight on how we got here. And
Sure. So one of the biggest challenges for every startup is raising capital. Just give us some insights and some of the experiences that you've had in terms of patching together investors, and how do you go about sourcing new sets of investors? What's worked? What hasn't worked? Maybe thoughts on that.
I'm sure, and it's very different from the advanced materials field that I came from prior to getting back into the life sciences. There, the key risk is really more one of scalability, being able to make enough of a material at as low of a cost as possible so that you can find customers willing to adopt it, and then that, of course, drives your sales. In the pharmaceutical or biotech industry, regulatory risk is the chief risk. And therefore, you have a very specific subset of investors who really understand that space. And it's a handful of traditional institutional investors, a larger number of family offices, and a very diffuse array of individual investors, which certainly angelMD has done a very, very good job of corralling that specific interest group. And I would say that at least for a company like Sensulin, the groups that we tend to attract have some personal tie to diabetes, whether it's type 1 or type 2. It could be a direct family relationship, a parent, sibling, or even the person that's making the investment. But also those that really understand the healthcare dynamics that we're facing going forward. And I guess to some extent, a lot of the family offices, the larger ones, even put us in the same bucket as their charitable investments, or I guess charitable donations, thinking that it's a way to sort of drive both mission and hopefully also to sustain their ongoing efforts to advance healthcare and hopefully make some difference in society. So it's no matter how many times I do this, it still takes a ton of time. I wish that were not the case, and I see a lot of great things on the horizon, particularly from groups like angelMD that are making some pretty dramatic advances in the space. I'm also encouraged by the Jobs Act and its impact on bringing back the small IPO. And I think at the end of the day, you just really have to try as hard as you can to cobble together whatever funding you can to reach that one critical experiment that proves that you have something. And from that point, obviously, then the larger amounts of capital are available to you in the more traditional settings.
So fast forward kind of beyond the next year, what's the future vision? As you go out, maybe set your headlights out a little bit further. Where do you see Sensulin 2-3 years from now? So
as a small company, we basically have to assume that we're not going to find a partner that's willing to acquire the company, and with, of course, the hope that we will find somebody at the end of the day who's willing to do that, or perhaps that the IPO window will be open at the time that our investors are looking for an exit. So as a default, our basic assumption is that we have to go it alone, and we should prepare to push as far into the clinic as we can, hopefully no further than phase 2 before finding a significant exit. But having said that, the timeline here is such that within 36 months, we expect to have our first in-human readout in this clinical setting in both type 1 and type 2 diabetes patients. So for a lot of the traditional buyers, if you will, of companies like this, that is the key milestone that will drive the potential acquisition interest. And at the same time, if for some reason in 2017 and the early part of 2018, we, for whatever reason, haven't found somebody willing to pick it up, be that the product itself or the company, I still think we have the ability to go out and raise the larger amounts of capital we need to do a much bigger phase 2 study. And you sort of have to do that, because I jokingly refer to the prior companies I've been involved with that, every single one of those companies felt the exact same until the moment that it was acquired, as I previously mentioned. And there's really no way to know on the front end. So that's why I say you have to be prepared to go it alone for as long as possible. It's really a very punishing way to make a living.
That's a good way to put it. Tell, just finally, kind of give us a sense of how you, again, with a small team and a diffuse team, just tell us a little bit about how you manage your time and your prioritization at the stage you're at, to give inspiration, insight to other entrepreneurs maybe coming up on that same task.
Sure. So I would say at a high level, there are 3 or 4 events that I have to attend every year just to interact with potential acquirers, potential investors. And in the healthcare space, that means JP Morgan Healthcare Conference the second week of January, typically Bio mid-year, And towards the end of the year, there are a handful of different ones that I sort of mix and match towards the end of the year. And between those meetings, I basically can cover a broad swath of the potential partners and investors in the healthcare space. And of course, that coupled with regular trips to both coasts, San Diego, San Francisco, Boston, and New York. I spent a lot of time fundraising in those 4 cities in particular. So it's a situation where, since we have a great CTO, it's not like the lab is on autopilot. It takes a lot of day-to-day interaction there. But with people like Chris Rhodes, we feel like it's in good hands, basically, and I can focus on all of the things outside of the laboratory environment that need to be done. So the accounting, the finance, the audit, all of the things that the scientists hate. And that can be done fairly easily without being in the same city as everyone else. It's a huge mess of time commitments that you manage by any means that you can.
Absolutely. Well, is there any last thoughts you have? Anything that maybe I failed to ask or that you wanted to share or comes to mind?
Nothing especially comes to mind other than we certainly appreciate the support of angelMD, and at some point in the future, of course, we're happy to give back and try to help others that find themselves in the same environment, trying to start companies and revolutionize healthcare.
Excellent. Well, Mike Moradi of Sensulin, thanks for joining us in the spotlight today.
Yeah, thanks, Evan.